Sarah Chin adjusted her glasses and smoothed down her navy blazer as she walked into the lecture hall. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across rows of empty seats. She had arrived 30 minutes early for the advanced security assessment training, a habit she had developed during her 10 years working in corporate risk management. The room gradually filled with her fellow trainees, a mix of security professionals, law enforcement officers, and corporate executives. Sarah chose her usual spot in the third row, center seat. She preferred being close enough to see every detail on the presentation screen while maintaining a good view of the entire room. Old habits from her psychology degree days, she told herself, though she knew it was more than that. As people settled into their seats, Sarah observed the group with practiced eyes. There was Marcus, a former military police officer who always sat in the back corner with his back to the wall. Next to him sat Elena, a corporate security director who constantly checked her phone. 3 rows ahead, David, a young IT security specialist, was already setting up his laptop and testing his note-taking software. The instructor, Dr. James Morrison, entered precisely at 9 o'clock. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with graying temples and the kind of confident bearing that commanded attention without effort. Dr. Morrison had spent 25 years in federal law enforcement before transitioning to private consulting and training. His reputation for creating realistic, challenging scenarios was legendary in the security community. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the room without amplification. "Today we begin the final phase of your Advanced Threat Assessment certification. Over the next week, you'll face scenarios designed to test not just your knowledge, but your instincts, your ability to think under pressure, and, most importantly, your capacity to identify real danger when it's hidden among the ordinary." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her pen poised over her notebook. She had been preparing for this certification for 6 months, studying threat assessment methodologies, behavioral analysis techniques, and crisis management protocols. This certification would open doors to higher-level positions in corporate security and, potentially, federal consulting opportunities. The traditional approach to security training, Dr. Morrison continued, walking slowly across the front of the room, focuses on obvious threats. The man with a weapon. The suspicious package. The unauthorized personnel in restricted areas. But real danger, the kind that causes the most damage, rarely announces itself so clearly. He stopped and made eye contact with several people in the room. When his gaze met Sarah's, she felt a brief chill, though she couldn't explain why. There was something in his eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Real danger," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "wears a friendly face. It has the right credentials. It knows exactly what to say to gain trust. It studies its targets carefully before making a move. Real danger is patient, methodical, and often unrecognizable until it's too late." The room was completely silent. Even Elena had stopped checking her phone. Dr. Morrison moved to his desk and picked up a thick folder. "Your first exercise begins now." In this folder are detailed profiles of 20 individuals who have requested security clearances for a major government contractor. 15 of these profiles are legitimate. 5 represent serious security threats. Your job is to identify which 5 pose the greatest danger. He began distributing packets to each trainee. "You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to complete your analysis. You may use any resources available to you: internet research, background check databases, professional networks. The only restriction is that you cannot discuss your findings with other trainees until after you've submitted your conclusions." Sarah received her packet and immediately began scanning the first profile. It contained a photograph, a detailed resume, references, psychological evaluation results, and various other documents. The individual was a former military officer with an exemplary service record, multiple commendations, and stellar references from commanding officers. As she worked through the profiles, Sarah found herself growing increasingly puzzled. Every individual seemed thoroughly vetted and legitimate. Their backgrounds checked out, their references were impeccable, and their psychological evaluations showed no red flags. If there were threats hidden among these profiles, they were expertly concealed. Around her, other trainees worked with intense concentration. She could hear the soft clicking of keyboards as people conducted internet searches and the rustling of papers as they took notes. The atmosphere in the room had become charged with competitive energy. After 2 hours of analysis, Sarah had identified 3 potential concerns, but none seemed like serious threats. One individual had a minor financial issue in their past that had been resolved. Another had a brief period of unemployment that wasn't fully explained. The third had references that seemed almost too perfect, which made her slightly suspicious. During the lunch break, trainees dispersed to the cafeteria or stepped outside for fresh air. Sarah remained in the lecture hall, using the quiet time to review her analysis. Dr. Morrison also stayed behind, working at his desk with the same intense focus he demanded from his students. Finding this challenging, he asked, looking up from his papers. Sarah nodded. I expected more obvious red flags. These profiles all seem remarkably clean. That's exactly the point, Dr. Morrison replied with a slight smile. In the real world, genuine threats rarely advertise themselves. They invest considerable effort in appearing normal, even exemplary. The challenge is developing the intuition to spot the subtle inconsistencies that reveal true intentions. He stood and walked over to where Sarah was sitting. Tell me, what's your background in threat assessment? 10 years in corporate risk management, Sarah replied. I've handled everything from workplace violence threats to industrial espionage investigations. I thought I had developed pretty good instincts for identifying dangerous individuals. Corporate environments are controlled spaces, Dr. Morrison said. The threats you've dealt with were likely reactive, problems that emerged from existing situations. What we're teaching here is proactive threat identification. The ability to spot danger before it manifests into action. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah continued her analysis with growing frustration. She expanded her research, checking social media profiles, news archives, and professional licensing databases. She cross-referenced addresses, verified employment histories, and even looked for patterns in the way the individuals had filled out their applications. By 4 o'clock, she had identified 5 individuals as potential threats, but she wasn't confident in any of her choices. Her selections felt more like educated guesses than informed assessments. She wondered if other trainees were having similar difficulties or if she was missing something obvious. At exactly 5 o'clock, Dr. Morrison called for everyone to submit their findings. Trainees placed sealed envelopes containing their analyses on his desk. The room buzzed with nervous energy as people compared notes on the difficulty of the exercise. I'll review your submissions tonight, Dr. Morrison announced. Tomorrow morning, we'll discuss the results and begin the next phase of your training. I want everyone here at 8:30 sharp. As people gathered their belongings and began to leave, Sarah lingered to ask Dr. Morrison a question about one of the profiles that had particularly puzzled her. She waited until the room had mostly cleared before approaching his desk. Dr. Morrison, I wanted to ask about profile number 12. The woman who worked in overseas development projects. Her employment history shows gaps that coincide with locations where significant security incidents occurred, but her references all speak highly of her character and competence. Dr. Morrison looked up from organizing the submitted envelopes. His expression had changed subtly, becoming more serious and focused. What specific security incidents are you referring to? Sarah consulted her notes. 3 separate incidents over a 5-year period. Embassy break-ins in countries where she was working on development projects. The timing seemed coincidental, but the pattern troubled me. Interesting observation, Dr. Morrison said slowly. Most people wouldn't have noticed those connections. Tell me, what made you look for that particular correlation? Instinct, I suppose, Sarah replied. Something about her profile felt too carefully constructed. Like someone had put significant effort into creating a believable but false narrative. Dr. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. You have good instincts, Sarah. Better than most people in your situation would have. Something in his tone made Sarah pause. There was an implication in his words that she couldn't quite grasp. My situation? Sitting in the 3rd row, paying attention to details that others miss, asking the right questions. Dr. Morrison's voice remained conversational, but Sarah sensed a shift in the atmosphere of the room. "You're exactly the type of person this exercise is designed to identify." Sarah felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Dr. Morrison stood and walked around his desk, moving closer to where Sarah stood. The movement seemed casual, but it had the effect of positioning himself between Sarah and the door. "The exercise wasn't really about identifying threats in those profiles, Sarah. It was about identifying the real threat in this room." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her mind racing to process what she was hearing. "I don't understand." "The exam was identify the danger," Dr. Morrison continued, his voice remaining calm and measured. "Everyone in this room spent the day analyzing fictional profiles, looking for threats that don't exist. But there was a real threat present the entire time. Someone who has been systematically infiltrating security training programs, gathering intelligence on assessment methodologies, and identifying vulnerabilities in corporate security systems." Sarah's heart began pounding. She could feel adrenaline flooding her system as her body prepared for fight or flight. But she forced herself to remain calm and analytical. "You think I'm some kind of spy?" "I don't think it, Sarah. I know it." Dr. Morrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a smartphone. He showed her the screen, which displayed what appeared to be surveillance photographs of her entering various corporate buildings over the past several months. "These were taken at 6 different companies where you've conducted security assessments in the past year. What we found interesting was that each of these companies experienced significant security breaches within 60 days of your visits." Sarah stared at the photographs, her mind working frantically to understand what was happening. The images were real, she recognized the locations and remembered the consultations she had conducted. But the implication was impossible. Those were legitimate consulting contracts. "I was hired to assess their security protocols." "Yes, you were hired," Dr. Morrison agreed. "By a shell company that exists solely to place you inside target organizations. A company that, interestingly, shares financial connections with several foreign intelligence services." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. "This is insane. You're accusing me of espionage based on coincidences and conspiracy theories. The beauty of your operation," Dr. Morrison continued, "is that you probably don't even know you're doing it. You were recruited years ago, possibly during graduate school, by someone who identified your potential. They've been carefully guiding your career, placing you in positions where you could gather valuable intelligence while believing you were doing legitimate work." Sarah's mind flashed back through her career progression. The unexpected scholarship offers that had made graduate school possible. The mentor who had guided her toward risk management. The consulting opportunities that had seemed too good to be true. The pattern, now that she looked for it, was disturbingly clear. "Even if what you're saying is true," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "even if someone has been manipulating my career, that doesn't make me a criminal. I've never knowingly engaged in espionage or stolen classified information." Dr. Morrison nodded sympathetically. "I believe that, Sarah. Which is why you're not under arrest. This training program was designed specifically to identify unconscious assets, people who have been programmed to gather and transmit intelligence without realizing they're doing it. We've been tracking your handlers for months, waiting for them to make contact with you again." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Make contact again?" "They'll reach out soon, Dr. Morrison said. "Probably tonight or tomorrow morning. They'll have some urgent consulting opportunity that requires your immediate attention. When they do, we'll be ready." The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. Sarah realized that her entire professional life, everything she thought she had earned through hard work and skill, might have been an elaborate deception. Worse, she was now being asked to participate in catching the people who had been using her. "What if I refuse to help?" she asked. Dr. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an unmistakable edge. Then, you'll be arrested as an uncooperative foreign asset and spend the next 20 years in federal prison while we build our case the hard way." Sarah looked around the empty lecture hall, searching for some escape from the nightmare her life had suddenly become. The morning sun that had seemed so welcoming now felt harsh and unforgiving. The seats where her fellow trainees had sat just minutes earlier seemed to mock her isolation. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "We've suspected for 6 months," Dr. Morrison replied. "This entire training program was created as a cover to bring you in for evaluation. Every other person in this room is either federal law enforcement or military intelligence. You were the only real trainee." The betrayal hit Sarah harder than the accusations. She had worked alongside these people for days, shared meals with them, worried about the same assignments. None of it had been real. She had been the subject of an elaborate psychological experiment, a lab rat being studied by researchers posing as fellow students. "The profiles I analyzed today," she said, the pieces finally falling into place. "They weren't random security clearance applications." "Correct," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "They were psychological profiles of your known associates and contacts. We wanted to see if you would identify any of your own handlers or raise concerns about people you knew to be involved in intelligence operations." Sarah thought back to her analysis of profile number 12, the woman whose employment history had troubled her. She realized now that it had probably been a real person, someone connected to her situation that the authorities wanted her to identify. "Did I pass?" she asked bitterly. "You identified several individuals we'd been investigating," Dr. Morrison said. "Including some we didn't know you were aware of. Your analysis was actually quite helpful." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. Even her attempt to do her job properly had been turned into evidence against her. Every instinct that had made her successful in her career was now being used to prove her guilt in a conspiracy she didn't understand. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Morrison checked his watch. "Now we wait for your handlers to make contact. When they do, you're going to help us catch them." "And, Sarah?" He looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "I genuinely hope that when this is over, we'll discover that you really were an unwitting pawn. Because if you're not, if you've been conscious of your role in this operation all along, then you're facing treason charges." As the weight of her situation settled over her, Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about herself and her life was about to be tested. She was either an innocent victim of an elaborate manipulation or a traitor to her country. And she was no longer certain which possibility frightened her more. Sarah spent that night in a safe house that felt more like a prison. The federal agents who had taken her into custody were professional but cold. They had confiscated her phone, laptop, and personal belongings, leaving her alone with nothing but her thoughts and a growing sense of panic about how her life had spiraled out of control in a single afternoon. The room was sparse but comfortable, with a single bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. 2 agents remained posted outside her door, and she could hear their quiet conversations through the thin walls. They were discussing sports scores and weekend plans, treating her detention as just another routine assignment. Unable to sleep, Sarah paced the small room and tried to reconstruct her career with fresh eyes. She thought about every major opportunity that had come her way, every mentor who had guided her decisions, every consulting contract that had seemed unusually lucrative. The pattern that Dr. Morrison had suggested was becoming clearer, but it still felt impossible to accept. Her graduate school advisor, Professor Williams, had been the first to suggest she specialize in corporate risk assessment. He had introduced her to several industry contacts who had later offered her internships and entry-level positions. At the time, it had seemed like generous mentorship from a professor who believed in her potential. Now she wondered if Professor Williams had been more than an academic advisor. The consulting firm that had offered her first major contract had contacted her out of the blue, claiming they had heard about her work from a mutual acquaintance they never clearly identified. The projects they offered paid exceptionally well and always seemed to involve companies with valuable intellectual property or sensitive government contracts. Sarah had attributed their generosity to the competitive consulting market and her growing reputation in the field. As dawn approached, Sarah finally fell into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened 3 hours later by a knock on the door. Agent Martinez, a woman in her 30s with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes, entered with a breakfast tray and a grim expression. "Your handlers made contact," Agent Martinez announced without preamble. Just like Dr. Morrison predicted they would. Sarah sat up in bed, instantly alert despite her exhaustion. "What kind of contact?" Agent Martinez set the tray on the desk and pulled out a chair. "Email came in around 5 a.m. to your work account. Urgent consulting opportunity. Major defense contractor needs immediate security assessment due to concerns about industrial espionage. They want you on site by tomorrow morning." The timing was almost comical in its predictability. Sarah would have laughed if the situation weren't so terrifying. "I suppose this proves Dr. Morrison's theory about my being an unwitting asset." "Actually, it raises more questions," Agent Martinez replied. The speed of their response suggests they knew you were compromised. Most intelligence operations would go dark for weeks or months after an asset was exposed. The fact that they're moving forward so quickly indicates either desperation or confidence that they can extract you before we can build a case. Sarah felt a chill of fear. "Extract me?" "Intelligence assets who become liabilities don't usually get retirement parties," Agent Martinez said bluntly. "If your handlers believe you've been turned or are about to expose their operation, they might decide you're more valuable dead than in federal custody." The breakfast tray sat forgotten as Sarah processed this new threat. She had been worried about prison, now she was facing the possibility of assassination by the very people who had been using her. The irony wasn't lost on her. The expertise and threat assessment that had made her valuable as an unwitting spy might now be the only thing keeping her alive. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked. Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. "We want you to take the assignment. Go to the defense contractor, conduct your normal security assessment, but this time you'll be wearing a wire and carrying tracking devices. We'll have teams in place to monitor every contact you make and every piece of information you access." "You want me to be bait," Sarah said. "We want you to help us catch a network of foreign operatives who have been stealing American defense secrets for years," Agent Martinez corrected. "You have a chance to make this right, Sarah. To prove that you're a victim rather than a willing participant." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray morning sky. The parking lot below was empty except for a few government vehicles and a maintenance truck. Everything looked normal and ordinary, but she knew that appearance was deceiving. Her entire life had been ordinary and normal, right up until the moment it revealed itself to be an elaborate lie. "What if I can't do it?" she asked. "What if I'm not brave enough to face these people knowing they might kill me?" "Then, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison wondering if you could have saved other people from being used the way you were used," Agent Martinez said. "Because this network didn't stop with you, Sarah. They have other assets, other unwitting agents conducting assessments at sensitive facilities across the country. Every day we don't shut them down is another day they're stealing secrets that could cost American lives." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had never thought of herself as particularly patriotic or heroic. She was just a security consultant who liked solving puzzles and helping companies protect their assets. But now she was being asked to risk her life to stop an espionage operation that she had unknowingly helped perpetrate. "If I agree to this," Sarah said, "what guarantees do I have that you'll protect me? What happens if something goes wrong and these people figure out I'm working with you?" Agent Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly? We'll do our best, but there are no guarantees in operations like this. Intelligence work is dangerous, even for people who choose it. For someone in your situation, the risks are significantly higher." Sarah appreciated the honesty, even though it wasn't reassuring. "And if I refuse to cooperate?" "Then, we'll charge you with conspiracy to commit espionage and let a jury decide whether they believe you were an innocent victim or a willing participant," Agent Martinez said. "Given the evidence we have linking you to successful intelligence operations, that's not a risk I would want to take if I were in your position." The choice, such as it was, seemed clear.
cooperation offered at least some possibility of redemption and survival. Refusal guaranteed prosecution and likely conviction for crimes she didn't remember committing. "I need to know more about what you expect me to do," Sarah said. "I've never been a spy before, even an unwitting one.
I don't know how to handle surveillance equipment or maintain cover stories under pressure." Agent Martinez smiled for the first time since entering the room. "The beauty of your situation is that you don't need to pretend to be something you're not. You're going to conduct a security assessment exactly the way you've always done. The only difference is that this time, we'll be recording everything and tracking everyone you interact with." Over the next several hours, Agent Martinez and a team of technical specialists prepared Sarah for her assignment. They fitted her with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as normal business accessories, a pen that contained a high-definition camera, earrings that functioned as microphones, and a laptop bag with built-in GPS tracking and data transmission capabilities. The technology was impressive, but Sarah found herself more focused on the psychological preparation. Dr. Morrison joined the briefing to help her understand what signs to look for that might indicate her handlers were becoming suspicious. "The key is to behave exactly as you normally would," Dr. Morrison explained. "Any deviation from your usual patterns or personality could alert them that something has changed. They've been studying you for years, so they know your habits and responses better than you might realize." Sarah found this advice both helpful and terrifying. The idea that strangers knew her behavior patterns better than she did was deeply unsettling. It made her question every decision she had made, every preference she had developed, every instinct she had learned to trust. "How will I know when they're trying to extract information from me?" she asked. "If I've been unconsciously providing intelligence for years, how can I recognize when they're manipulating me?" "You probably can't," Dr. Morrison admitted. "That's why we'll be monitoring everything in real time. If we see you being directed towards specific information or areas of the facility, we'll intervene before you can compromise anything critical." The team spent the afternoon rehearsing various scenarios and contingencies. Sarah practiced using the recording equipment, learned hand signals for communicating with surveillance teams, and memorized code words for indicating different levels of danger or distress. By evening, she felt as prepared as she could be for a situation she still didn't fully understand. That night, Sarah was moved to a hotel closer to the defense contractor's facility. The room looked normal, but she knew it was under constant surveillance by federal agents. She tried to sleep, knowing she would need her rest for whatever challenges awaited her the next day. As she lay in the dark, Sarah thought about the person she had been just 48 hours earlier. That Sarah had been confident in her abilities, proud of her career accomplishments, and excited about new opportunities in her field. This Sarah was terrified, confused, and completely dependent on people she had just met to keep her alive. The transformation felt surreal, like waking up in someone else's life. But, as frightening as it was, Sarah realized that it might also be liberating. For the first time in years, she knew exactly where she stood and what was expected of her. The uncertainty and manipulation that had apparently guided her entire career were gone, replaced by a clear mission and honest allies. Around midnight, Sarah's phone rang. The number was blocked, but Agent Martinez had prepared her for this possibility. She was to answer normally and allow the conversation to proceed naturally while recording equipment captured every word. "Sarah? This is David Chen from Strategic Security Solutions." The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was warm and professional. "I apologize for calling so late, but we have an urgent situation that requires your expertise." Sarah forced her voice to remain calm and professional. "Of course. What kind of situation are we dealing with?" "One of our major clients, Precision Defense Technologies, has discovered evidence of a possible security breach. They need an immediate assessment of their protocols and vulnerabilities. We've recommended you specifically for this assignment because of your experience with similar cases." The conversation continued for 10 minutes, with David providing details about the assignment, timeline, and compensation. To Sarah, it sounded exactly like dozens of legitimate consulting opportunities she had received over the years. If Agent Martinez was right about this being a contact from her handlers, the deception was remarkably sophisticated. After ending the call, Sarah lay awake for hours, wondering how many similar conversations she had had without recognizing their true purpose.
How many companies had she assessed that weren't really clients? How many security vulnerabilities had she identified that were later exploited by foreign operatives?
The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for what could be the most dangerous day of her life. She dressed in her normal business attire, checked her recording equipment one final time, and tried to convince herself that she was brave enough to face whatever awaited her at Precision Defense Technologies. Precision Defense Technologies occupied a sprawling complex of glass and steel buildings surrounded by multiple layers of security fencing. Sarah approached the main gate at exactly 9 o'clock, her hands steady on the steering wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The recording equipment hidden in her clothing felt heavier than it actually was, a constant reminder of the federal agents monitoring her every move. The security guard at the gate was professional but thorough, checking her credentials against a visitor list and conducting a basic vehicle inspection. Sarah had been through similar procedures dozens of times at other defense contractors, but now she found herself analyzing every detail with fresh eyes. Was this normal corporate security, or were there signs of the elevated threat awareness that might indicate the company had genuine concerns about espionage? Dr. Richardson, the executive who had requested her services, met Sarah in the lobby. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept checking his watch and glancing toward the security cameras mounted in the corners of the reception area. His behavior seemed consistent with someone genuinely worried about security breaches, but Sarah had learned not to trust her initial impressions of people.
Ms. Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice, Dr. Richardson said as he led her through a series of security checkpoints.
I hope David from Strategic Security Solutions explained the urgency of our situation. Sarah nodded, following him down a long corridor lined with photographs of military aircraft and missile systems. He mentioned evidence of a possible breach, but I'd like to hear the details directly from you. Dr. Richardson paused at a conference room door and looked around nervously before responding. 3 weeks ago, we discovered that someone had accessed classified project files from a supposedly secure terminal. The access occurred during normal business hours using valid credentials, but the employee those credentials belonged to was on vacation in Europe at the time. The scenario sounded plausible, but Sarah noticed something odd about Dr. Richardson's demeanor. His nervousness seemed performative, like an actor playing a role rather than a genuine reaction to a security crisis. She made a mental note to share this observation with the federal agents monitoring the situation. Inside the conference room, Dr. Richardson spread out building floor plans, organizational charts, and security protocols. Sarah began her standard assessment routine, asking questions about access controls, personnel screening procedures, and information handling policies. Everything proceeded normally for the first hour, with Dr. Richardson providing detailed answers and supporting documentation. Then, Dr. Richardson received a phone call that changed the atmosphere of the meeting. He spoke in hushed tones for several minutes before hanging up and turning back to Sarah with a troubled expression.
I'm afraid we have a complication, he said.
Our security director just informed me that the FBI has been asking questions about some of our contractors and consultants. They seem to be investigating possible connections between consulting firms and foreign intelligence services. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but she forced herself to maintain a calm professional demeanor.
That's concerning. Do you have any reason to believe this investigation might be related to your current security issues?
Honestly, I'm not sure, Dr. Richardson replied.
But I think it would be prudent for us to accelerate your assessment.
I'd like you to focus on our most sensitive areas first, in case we need to implement immediate security changes.
This request set off alarm bells in Sarah's mind.
In her experience, legitimate security assessments proceeded methodically through all areas of a facility. Rushing to examine the most sensitive areas first was exactly the kind of behavior that might indicate an attempt to extract high-value intelligence quickly. Dr. Richardson led Sarah to an elevator that required a special access card and biometric scan. As they descended to what he described as the classified research and development levels, Sarah activated one of her hidden recording devices with a subtle gesture she had practiced the previous day. The basement levels of the facility were a maze of laboratories, testing chambers, and secure storage areas. Dr. Richardson provided Sarah with a temporary access badge that allowed her to enter most areas, explaining that this was necessary for a comprehensive security assessment. Sarah realized that her handlers had given her remarkable access to sensitive information, far beyond what would normally be provided to an outside consultant. In the first laboratory they visited, Sarah encountered Dr. Lisa Park, a project manager who seemed surprised to see them. Dr. Park questioned Dr. Richardson about the authorization for Sarah's visit and expressed concern about allowing an outside consultant access to ongoing research projects. Her reaction seemed like the appropriate response of someone genuinely concerned about security protocols. "I wasn't notified about any security assessment," Dr. Park said, looking directly at Sarah. "Can you show me the authorization paperwork for this visit?" Dr. Richardson appeared flustered by the question, fumbling through his briefcase before claiming he had left the necessary documents in his office upstairs. He assured Dr. Park that Sarah was fully cleared and that the assessment had been approved at the highest levels of the company. Sarah found herself in an uncomfortable position. Dr. Park's concerns were completely reasonable and professional. If Sarah were conducting a legitimate security assessment, she would expect to encounter exactly this kind of appropriate caution from project managers. The fact that Dr. Richardson couldn't produce proper authorization suggested that something was seriously wrong with this entire situation. "Perhaps we should return to your office to collect the authorization documents," Sarah suggested, giving Dr. Richardson an opportunity to address Dr. Park's concerns properly. Instead of agreeing to this reasonable suggestion, Dr. Richardson became more insistent that they proceed with the assessment immediately. He claimed that time was critical and that Dr. Park was being unnecessarily obstructive. His behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious, and Sarah wondered if the federal agents monitoring the situation were picking up on these warning signs. Dr. Park remained firm in her position, eventually threatening to call building security if Dr. Richardson didn't provide proper authorization for Sarah's access. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Dr. Richardson becoming angry and Dr. Park becoming more suspicious of the entire situation. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something significant. If Dr. Richardson was one of her handlers, his loss of composure under pressure revealed important information about how the espionage operation functioned. If he was a legitimate company executive, his inability to produce authorization documents suggested that someone else had arranged Sarah's visit without proper approval. The situation was resolved when building security arrived and demanded to see documentation for Sarah's visit. Dr. Richardson was forced to admit that he didn't have the proper paperwork and that Sarah's access needed to be verified through official channels. Security escorted them back to the upper levels of the building while they sorted out the authorization issues. In Dr. Richardson's office, Sarah watched him make several phone calls to people he claimed were company executives. The conversations were brief and heated, with Dr. Richardson repeatedly emphasizing the urgent need for Sarah to complete her assessment. His behavior suggested someone operating under pressure from external forces rather than genuine concern for company security. During a break in the phone calls, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom. In the privacy of the bathroom, she used a prearranged hand signal to indicate to the surveillance cameras that she believed Dr. Richardson was behaving suspiciously and that the situation might be escalating toward a dangerous confrontation. When she returned to the office, Dr. Richardson was ending another phone call with an expression of relief on his face. "Good news," he announced. "I've received authorization to proceed with your assessment. However, there's been a change in priorities. Instead of examining the research laboratories, we need to focus on the computer systems and data storage facilities." This shift in focus confirmed Sarah's suspicions that Dr. Richardson was operating under directions from someone else. The request to examine computer systems and data storage was exactly the kind of thing that would interest foreign intelligence services seeking to access or copy sensitive information. Sarah agreed to the new focus area while mentally preparing herself for what might be the most dangerous phase of her undercover operation. She knew that the federal agents monitoring the situation would be analyzing every word and action for signs that she was being directed to access specific information or systems. Dr. Richardson led her to the company's main data center, a secure facility filled with servers, network equipment, and backup systems. He provided her with access credentials that seemed far too comprehensive for a routine security assessment. Sarah found herself with the ability to access financial records, personnel files, research data, and even classified government contracts. As she began her examination of the computer systems, Sarah noticed that Dr. Richardson was paying particular attention to her analysis of certain servers and databases. He asked specific questions about network vulnerabilities, data encryption methods, and backup procedures. His questions were more detailed and technically sophisticated than she would expect from a typical corporate executive. Sarah realized that she was being guided through a systematic intelligence collection operation. Dr. Richardson was using her legitimate expertise in security assessment to identify vulnerabilities that could later be exploited by foreign operatives. Every weakness she documented and every access method she analyzed was potentially valuable intelligence that could be used to compromise the company's systems. The federal agents had prepared her for this possibility, but experiencing it firsthand was deeply unsettling. Sarah felt like she was betraying not only her country but also her professional ethics. Every assessment she conducted and every vulnerability she identified could potentially be used to harm the very organization she was supposed to be protecting. As the day progressed, Dr. Richardson became increasingly insistent that Sarah focus on specific systems and data repositories. He claimed that these areas had shown signs of unauthorized access and needed immediate attention. Sarah suspected that these were actually the systems her handlers were most interested in compromising. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dr. Richardson received another phone call that seemed to agitate him significantly. After ending the call, he informed Sarah that they needed to conclude the assessment immediately due to an urgent meeting he had to attend. He asked her to provide a preliminary report on the most critical vulnerabilities she had identified. Sarah realized that this was probably the moment when her handlers expected her to provide them with actionable intelligence. Everything that had happened during the day had been building toward this transfer of sensitive information. She knew that the federal agents monitoring the situation would be recording every detail of her response. "I'll need time to analyze all the information I've collected before I can provide meaningful recommendations," Sarah said, trying to buy time and avoid immediately compromising any sensitive systems. Dr. Richardson became more insistent, claiming that the company needed at least a preliminary assessment of the most serious security risks. He pressed Sarah to identify which systems would be easiest to compromise and what methods an attacker might use to gain unauthorized access. Sarah found herself walking a dangerous line between maintaining her cover and avoiding providing information that could genuinely harm national security. She provided general observations about security practices while avoiding specific technical details that could be used to plan actual attacks. As the conversation continued, Sarah noticed that Dr. Richardson was becoming increasingly frustrated with her reluctance to provide detailed technical information. His professional facade was beginning to slip, revealing what seemed like desperation to obtain specific intelligence within a limited time frame. The situation reached a critical point when Dr. Richardson demanded that Sarah provide him with copies of all her assessment notes and documentation before leaving the facility. This request was completely outside normal consulting procedures and confirmed Sarah's suspicions that she was dealing with hostile intelligence operatives rather than legitimate corporate executives. Sarah realized that she was about to face the most dangerous moment of her undercover operation. How she responded to Dr. Richardson's demand would determine whether her mission succeeded or failed, and possibly whether she survived the day. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she closed her laptop, the weight of Dr. Richardson's demand hanging heavy in the air between them. She could feel his eyes studying her reaction, searching for any sign that she suspected the true nature of their interaction. Everything Dr. Morrison and Agent Martinez had taught her about maintaining cover came flooding back as she prepared to navigate the most critical moments of her life. "I understand your urgency," Sarah said carefully, "but I never provide raw assessment data to clients. It's part of my professional standards to analyze and verify all findings before sharing them. Unprocessed data could lead to misunderstandings or inappropriate responses." Dr. Richardson's expression darkened, and Sarah saw a flash of something dangerous in his eyes. The polite corporate executive was disappearing, replaced by someone far more threatening.
Miss Chen, I think you misunderstand the nature of this situation. This isn't a normal consulting arrangement. We have specific requirements that need to be met immediately.
The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Dr. Richardson's posture became more aggressive, and he moved closer to where Sarah sat, effectively blocking her path to the door. Sarah realized that her handlers were done pretending, and the situation was about to become very dangerous very quickly.
I'm not sure what you mean, Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady.
I've conducted security assessments exactly as requested.
If there are specific concerns you'd like me to address, I'm happy to discuss them, but I can't provide raw data that might be misinterpreted. Dr.
Richardson checked his watch and then looked toward the window, as if expecting someone or something.
Sarah, I'm going to be very direct with you. We know exactly who you are and what you've been doing for us for the past several years.
We also know that you've been compromised and are now working with federal authorities.
What we need to determine is whether you can still be useful to us.
The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her worst fears were confirmed, her handlers knew she had been turned, and they were still proceeding with their operation. Dr. Morrison had warned her that this might happen, but experiencing it was terrifying. She was trapped in a room with people who knew she was working against them and who had nothing to lose by eliminating her.
I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said, hoping desperately that the federal surveillance teams were monitoring the situation and preparing to intervene. I'm here to conduct a security assessment.
If you're not satisfied with my work, I'll be happy to leave and recommend another consultant.
Dr. Richardson laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The time for pretending is over, Sarah.
You've been our asset for 3 years, providing us with detailed intelligence on corporate and government security systems.
You've been very valuable, even if you didn't know what you were doing.
Sarah felt a chill of recognition as pieces of her manipulated career finally clicked into place. 3 years ago, she had started working with Strategic Security Solutions, the consulting firm that had provided her with her most lucrative and high-profile assignments. Every major success in her recent career had come through connections to this organization. Professor Williams recruited you during graduate school, Dr. Richardson continued, clearly enjoying Sarah's obvious distress. We identified you as someone with the right combination of skills, ambition, and naivety. We've been guiding your career ever since, placing you in positions where you could access the information we needed. The mention of Professor Williams sent a shock of betrayal through Sarah. Her graduate advisor had been more than a mentor, he had been a father figure during a difficult period in her life. The idea that he had been manipulating her for foreign intelligence services was almost too painful to process. Even after you were exposed, Dr. Richardson said, we decided to proceed with this operation because the intelligence we can gather here is too valuable to abandon. And because we wanted to send a message to your new federal friends about what happens to people who interfere with our operations. The threat was explicit and terrifying. Sarah realized that she wasn't just bait in a federal investigation, she was about to become the victim of a demonstration murder designed to intimidate other potential defectors. Her cooperation with the authorities had marked her for execution. Sarah's training kicked in as she assessed her options. The office had one door, which Dr. Richardson was blocking, and windows that were probably reinforced and certainly too high above ground level for escape. Her only hope was that the federal surveillance teams were prepared to intervene before the situation escalated to violence. You're making a mistake, Sarah said, standing up from her chair and taking a small step toward the window. If I disappear, it will only bring more attention from federal investigators. You'd be better off letting me leave quietly and finding another way to accomplish your objectives. Dr. Richardson shook his head and pulled a small device from his pocket. Sarah recognized it as a signal jammer, designed to block radio transmissions and cellular communications. The federal agents monitoring her situation might have just lost contact with their surveillance equipment. The building is equipped with additional countermeasures that your federal friends don't know about, Dr. Richardson said. Their surveillance technology stopped working the moment you entered the classified levels. As far as they know, you're conducting a routine security assessment with no indication of problems.
Sarah felt her last hope of immediate rescue evaporating.
She was alone with hostile intelligence operatives in a facility specifically designed to prevent electronic surveillance. The federal agents who were supposed to be protecting her might not even know she was in danger.
"What do you want from me?"
Sarah asked, deciding that her only option was to buy time and hope that someone would notice her prolonged absence. "We want the access codes and security protocols for the 3 government contractors you assessed last month," Dr. Richardson said.
"We know you have that information because we've been monitoring your communications.
What we need to determine is whether you'll provide it voluntarily or whether we'll need to extract it through less pleasant methods." Sarah realized that her handlers had been planning this confrontation for weeks, if not months. They had continued monitoring her even after her exposure, collecting intelligence about her federal cooperation and preparing to neutralize her when the time was right. The sophistication of their operation was far beyond what she had imagined possible. "I don't have access to that information anymore," Sarah lied, hoping to convince them that she was no longer valuable enough to justify the risk of murdering her. "The federal authorities took all my files and computers.
I couldn't provide those access codes even if I wanted to."
Dr. Richardson smiled coldly.
"Sarah, we've been studying you for 3 years.
We know your habits, your backup procedures, and your security practices better than you do.
You've never relied entirely on digital storage for sensitive information.
You keep written notes in a physical notebook that you carry with you at all times.
That notebook contains everything we need."
Sarah's heart sank as she realized how thoroughly her handlers had studied her personal and professional habits. Her notebook was indeed in her laptop bag, containing detailed documentation from her recent assessments. She had never considered that this harmless habit of keeping written records could become a weapon used against her.
"Even if I give you what you want," Sarah said, "you're still going to kill me. I know too much about your operation to be allowed to live."
"That depends entirely on how cooperative you are," Dr. Richardson replied. "If you provide the information we need and agree to resume your previous role as our asset, we might be able to find a way for you to survive this situation. The alternative is much less pleasant."
Sarah knew she was being offered a false choice.
Intelligence services didn't allow compromised assets to return to active duty, especially ones who had cooperated with enemy investigations. Dr. Richardson was simply trying to secure her cooperation before eliminating her as a security risk. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside the office made both Sarah and Dr. Richardson freeze. Someone was approaching the door, and Sarah prayed it might be the federal surveillance team coming to rescue her. Dr. Richardson moved quickly to the door and listened carefully before relaxing slightly. "Right on schedule," he said, checking his watch again. "My colleagues are here to help complete our business." 2 more people entered the office, a woman in her 40s with short black hair and a younger man who looked like he might have military training. Both moved with the controlled efficiency of professional operatives, and Sarah realized that her situation had become exponentially more dangerous.
"Miss Chen," the woman said in accented English, "my name is Elena Kozlov. I represent the organization that has been benefiting from your work over the past several years. We appreciate your contributions to our research efforts, even if they were involuntary." The confirmation that she had been working for foreign intelligence services, even unknowingly, hit Sarah harder than the physical threats. She had spent her entire career protecting American companies and government contractors from exactly the kind of espionage operation she had apparently been facilitating. "We have a proposition for you," Elena continued. "You can provide us with the information we need and accept relocation to a country where you can continue your work under our direct supervision. Or you can refuse and force us to obtain the information through methods that you would find extremely unpleasant." Sarah looked around the room at the 3 operatives who held her fate in their hands. She thought about the federal agents who were probably searching for her, the life she would never be able to return to, and the possibility that she might not survive the next hour. "I need time to consider your offer," Sarah said, hoping to delay the inevitable confrontation until help arrived or an opportunity for escape presented itself. Elena checked her own watch and shook her head. "I'm afraid time is one luxury we cannot afford.
The building's security schedule includes a shift change in 15 minutes. We need to complete our business and depart before the new guards discover any irregularities. The time pressure explained the rushed pace of the entire operation. Sarah realized that her handlers were operating under strict constraints, which might create opportunities for her to disrupt their plans or signal for help.
Before I make any decisions, Sarah said, I want to understand what happened to Professor Williams. Did you kill him when he was no longer useful to you?
The question seemed to surprise Elena, who exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. Professor Williams is alive and, well, living comfortably in a country that values his contributions to education and international cooperation. He sends his regards and hopes you'll make the same intelligent choice he made when his usefulness in America came to an end. This revelation that her mentor was alive but had consciously betrayed her and countless others made Sarah angrier than she had ever been in her life. The fear that had been paralyzing her began to transform into cold fury at being used and manipulated by people she had trusted. Professor Williams was a traitor, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger.
And so are all of you. You've spent years destroying the lives of innocent people for money and ideology. I won't help you do it to anyone else. Elena's expression hardened at Sarah's defiance.
She nodded to the young man, who moved toward Sarah with obvious hostile intent. Sarah realized that her time for negotiation had ended, and she was about to face the consequences of her refusal to cooperate. Just as the situation reached its most critical point, the office door exploded inward as federal agents in tactical gear burst into the room. The carefully planned intelligence operation dissolved into chaos as Sarah threw herself to the floor and her captors scrambled for weapons that weren't there. The rescue was over in seconds, but Sarah knew that the larger battle against the espionage network that had controlled her life was just beginning. As she was led to safety by the federal agents she had learned to trust, Sarah realized that sitting in row 3 of that lecture hall had been the most important decision of her life, not because of where she chose to sit, but because of what that choice had revealed about the elaborate deception that had been her entire career.